Good evening, everyone. This is MP Damien Couric. Very pleased that you can all join me here this evening for my June 2nd Zoom town hall. Oh, sorry, just let me turn that down. I have my Facebook stream as well. So thanks so that I can answer questions hopefully off of both Zoom and the town hall live on Facebook. So good evening to everybody who has joined. Thank you very much for taking time out of your evening on what is a beautiful evening here in Battle River Crowfoot. I think in Camrose it cracked 30 degrees here today, so it is an absolutely gorgeous day, and certainly when the weather is good, there's always a bit of optimism in the air. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me here this evening. So I wanted to, generally how these town halls work is pretty simple. I'll open up with a few comments, and then I'll get to some questions to try to get through as many questions over the next hour or so as is possible. And now I do have a few folks that have submitted questions beforehand, either because they're not able to make the call this evening and plan to watch it later, or they just felt more comfortable sending it in beforehand. And then certainly I'll try to get to as many of your questions as I can over, like I said, the next hour or so. So first, thank you very much for the honor to be able to be your member of parliament. I know this is not the last year and a half that anybody's expected, but it has been an honor to fight for you in the midst of all the challenges and to be your voice in our capital. So thank you for that honor. Now, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge what was discovered last week in Kamloops with 215 with the bodies of 215 children being discovered outside of a residential school, a former residential school. Certainly that is a national tragedy, and further, it's unknown how many more sites like this exist across our country, and it's certainly touched Canadians from coast to coast, and it's important for us to acknowledge these aspects of our history. And for my part, I lowered the flag to half-mast in my constituency office here in Camrose, and I've shared with a number of folks. Previous to being elected a number of years ago, I worked for the government of Saskatchewan while Brad Wall was premier, and one of the things that I did while working at the legislature there was work for the Minister of Parks, Culture, and Sport, and working for then Minister Ken Cheveldayoff. One of the things that he did was designate the former site where there's a cemetery of the Regina Indian Industrial School, very similar to a residential school. Designate the site of where the footprint of the cemetery is. And certainly, that was about five or so years ago, and just a poignant example of the tragedy and pain associated with residential schools across Canada. So I did want to acknowledge that, and certainly, if you have any further questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them. But quick update, like I said, it's been busy in Ottawa. We're in what is considered kind of the final legislative stretch before Parliament rises for the summer. The date that is planning to take place is on June 23rd, and it's always busy these final weeks before summer. Generally, the government is in a rush to get a few things accomplished, and we've just seen an incredible amount of mismanagement and delay from the current Liberal government in terms of their legislative agenda. Now, ironically, whenever they get delayed on something, they blame the opposition, even though it was them that prorogued Parliament last fall, that it shut down committees and a whole bunch of other things that caused to months and months of delay. So now they're trying to catch up, and that certainly led to some challenges when it comes to the ability to debate things, but I can assure you that Conservatives are working diligently to make sure that your voices are heard in our capital, and to ensure that legislation has appropriate scrutiny. A big part of it simply comes down to this. When the reason why Parliament exists is because every Canadian is represented there. 338 constituencies all across our country. Every square inch of this country is represented. And it's so important that Parliament has appropriate time to scrutinize legislation, because if we don't, then there's mistakes. And we saw that time and time again throughout the pandemic, with the government literally introducing something, needing it to get passed, doing it quickly, and then realizing they made mistakes, and then having to go back and do it again. And there's some of you, because I've heard from some of you, that are still facing the consequences of that. So it's a busy final stretch here, number of weeks before Parliament rises for the summer, and certainly the whole spring and winter session has been very busy as well. I've been back and forth to Ottawa as much as possible. Just on a little bit of a personal note, my wife is expecting our third child, who is due any day. So that's exciting for our family, but certainly it adds a little bit of a complicated dynamic. So I'm still joining in and ensuring that the job gets done for the folks of Battle River Crowfoot, while also being very, very excited about a new addition coming. And then finally, just to let you know, when it comes to the constituency side of things, when Parliament rises for the summer, an MP's job is not done. Any member of Parliament, politician that says they can take time off when Parliament's not sitting, they really aren't serving the people. So I'm really looking forward, especially with some optimism, a path to reopen our province. I'm looking forward to getting out and back in our communities. I've done that where possible in the midst of everything related to COVID-19, but I'm really excited to get out and connect with as many of you as possible. And as much as Zoom is a reasonable alternative, it's not the same as meeting face to face. Yeah, that kind of wraps up a bit of the update. Looking forward to getting to your questions. And so just as a little bit of a housekeeping item, plan to keep this going for about an hour or so, and so please feel free to either type in the chat, ask a question in the Q&A, or for those of you on Facebook, I look down because I have my iPad here with the stream on Facebook as well. It's a little bit delayed, but I will do my best to get to as many of your questions as possible. And if I miss something, because it's possible, there's about 40 people on the Zoom call, and 20 or so on Facebook, and there could be others. If there's anything that I miss, please feel free to send me an email, and I will post my contact information in both the chat on Zoom and on Facebook as well. Please get in touch. Yeah, and further, if you have a concern related to any federal government program, COVID related or not, or simply don't know where to turn, as your member of Parliament, I will do everything I can to fight for you. And I know a few people that are on the call I have spoken with already about a number of concerns, but please feel free to reach out and let me know your concerns. Let me fight for you. And even if you don't know where to go, I've got some great staff both here and in Ottawa that I will do everything that they can to fight for you. So with that, let's get to some questions. So there's been a number of questions about an issue that is referred to as Motion 118. Now, I've got some emails and some messages on Facebook, and I guess it's going around that somehow Parliament voted to suspend elections temporarily or indefinitely or permanently, according to some. I just want to assure everybody on this call that is false. There was a block motion that was brought forward by the Bloc Québécois a number of weeks ago that basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the specific motion in front of me, but it was a non-binding motion that basically suggests the will of Parliament. And it's this, that the Prime Minister not unilaterally call an election during the pandemic. It's key here because through experience and seeing how the Prime Minister has attempted to circumvent Parliament and to use everything, including this crisis that the world, our country finds itself in, for his political benefit, this motion was meant to ensure that direct question was asked. It does not suspend elections. And if there is a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons, which happen on a regular basis, anytime there's one of two things. One is a finance-related bill. So if it has to do with Parliament authorizing the government to spend money, that's a confidence vote. Whether it be a few $1,000s or whether it be massive like a budget where it's dealing with billions of dollars, that's a confidence motion. If the government was to lose those votes, we would be in an election. Also, there's been a number of times, whether it's opposition parties or the government will say, this is a motion of confidence, and if it's successful, then the government continues on its path. If it's not, then the government would go to the Governor General, because Parliament doesn't have the confidence, which is how our system works, to allow that government to continue governing our country. That hasn't changed, folks. I can assure you of that. So with, I think, some well-meaning commentary that's been circulating on the internet, not to worry. We have not lost democracy. Justin Trudeau, as much as he admires the basic dictatorship of China, he is still accountable to Parliament, which is our democratic institution. And I can assure you that certainly Conservatives will continue to do everything we can to hold the Trudeau government to account. And just last week, Conservatives voted against a budget, and I can get into some more details on that. So quite a number of you have asked questions on that. So I wanted to take care of that right off the top, because I want to make sure that you understand very, very clearly that democracy is still strong in this country, and that Conservatives are fighting for you, and that if there's a motion of confidence that the government loses, we will go to an election. Now, the reason why, and I'll conclude answering this question with this, because if the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was to see a political opportunity, it's unfortunate, but he would very likely take it. We've seen him musing about an election in the midst of provinces going back into lockdown. And we saw specifically an example with what happened in Newfoundland and Labrador, where in the middle of an election, they shut the province down. And it resulted in a Liberal majority government with record low voter turnout. All of a sudden, people were having to receive ballots via mail, and some real concerns associated with that. So Conservatives did support this motion to tell the Prime Minister that he is not to abuse his position and call an election unless it is something that Parliament mandates with a confidence vote. So I just wanted to make that very, very clear. Okay, so I know a number of you have asked questions about the reopen plan and some of the COVID restrictions, and certainly there's aspects of that are federal responsibility. And as your member of Parliament, that's the level of government that I am responsible for, and specifically responsible as a member of the opposition and holding the Trudeau Liberals to account. But a lot of that is provincial jurisdiction. And I'll also post in the chat here a link to a link where to a website where you can find contact information for your MLA. And I'd encourage you to reach out to them when it comes to the provincial health restrictions. Now, when it comes to the federal issues, Conservatives have been very, very critical of some of the challenges faced, and how the government was slow to react in addressing COVID in the beginning, with failing to address COVID coming over our borders, and then likewise was almost entirely ineffective in the techniques and the methods that they used to try and control it later on. And an example of that is the mandatory hotel quarantines, where the government basically said that you couldn't simply quarantine at home. You had to spend thousands of dollars to stay in one of their approved hotel sites, and some significant mismanagement associated with that. So there's aspects that are federal, but when it comes to the specifics of local health restrictions, and as an MP from Alberta, the Alberta provincial government is responsible for that. So we'll post that link, and I would encourage you to reach out to your MLA as well if you have specific questions, concerns, and I'll simply comment this related to some of the status of restrictions in Alberta. It was encouraging yesterday. Patios opened on restaurants, and I know that in the coming weeks it looks like there will be further restrictions lifted. And as an Albertan, as somebody who lives in Battle River Crowfoot, I'm excited to be able to get back to normal. And it's encouraging when the weather is nice, and seeing that there is that we will be able to see COVID behind us. So yeah, that's another issue where I'd received quite a number of concerns that had been sent to me beforehand. So hopefully that answers that question. Another issue that I had a number of folks talk to me about was fiscal accountability, and a massive concern. And I won't get too much into the details, because I'd be talking about that for the next hour, other than to say I'm very, very concerned about the status of Canada's national fiscal situation, especially when the budget the Conservatives just voted against, that passed with the support of the NDP in Parliament, the debt management strategy, for example, wasn't a long-term strategy to get back to balance. It was simply this: let's borrow while interest rates are low and worry about it later. Folks, that's not a debt management strategy. That is a path towards fiscal destruction for our country. And I'm very, very concerned. And Conservatives are doing everything we can to hold the government to account on that through a number of mechanisms, whether it be debates in Parliament, whether it be my office files, dozens and dozens of access to information requests regarding how monies are being spent, and committees are hard at work ensuring that that there is as much accountability, because this seems to be the metric that the government uses for success for a program. It's how much they spend. Well, Conservatives differ from that. And while the government will accuse Conservatives of wanting to spend less, in many ways, they're right. We would spend less because we expect government to be efficient and to ensure that resources go to those who need it, and not simply shoveling money out the door in a way that has been shown to be not accountable. Very, very concerned about a lot of these directions. If you have some specific concerns, feel free to ask on that, and I'll try to get to those. So let's go into there. So Gordon asked a question. What was my response to the Liberals funding a Quebec pharmaceutical company for 170 million and an Ontario pharmaceutical company for almost 200 million, yet is ignoring a Calgary-based company that is already in clinical trials for a vaccine that was actually asking for less? Gordon, great question, and I agree. It's nonsensical, it seems, that there are these ready-made solutions that it appears that the only difference is they're in a region of the country that maybe doesn't vote Liberal. Well, folks, a government should not be buying votes in that way, and that's one of the key things that we bring up on a regular basis is the poor decision making of the government. And I believe it was Providence out of Calgary talked about how they were ready to go, but the government wouldn't even return their calls, and that's a shame, because instead of having ready-made solutions when it comes to things like vaccines in our country, the government mismanaged that on almost every front, leading to significant delays, which have actually prolonged the pandemic in this country, forcing Albertans and Canadians to look at other jurisdictions that are opening. Yet Alberta, just a month and a half ago, was going back into lockdowns. I'll tell you, that frustrated a ton of people, and I was frustrated, and I know, because I heard from many of you, incredible frustration associated with that. Whereas if we'd have been at the front of the line, if we'd been able to produce vaccines ourselves, which some countries were able to in the last year and a half, get that figured out. Yet it seems like the Liberal government was more interested in buying votes than actually working for Canadians. So Gordon, I hope that answers your question there. And when it comes to specific pharmaceutical policy, I know there's a big conversation around ensuring that Canada is an attractive environment to invest in, whether it be pharmaceuticals or otherwise. And certainly Conservatives are working on that to ensure that Canada is a world-class place for investment, for production, whether it be pharmaceuticals, whether it be investment in our energy industry. Whatever the case is, Canada is a good place to invest. Unfortunately, we've seen it fall to the back of the line under the Liberals. Okay, Don asked a question about the challenges with radar images from Environment Canada. Don, it's a pretty specific question, but I hear you. I've actually brought this specific issue to the Minister of Environment's attention, because it seems like there's just a lot of maintenance that hasn't been being done on Environment Canada's weather forecasting infrastructure on the prairies. A lot of this is older infrastructure, and it obviously needs to be repaired. Plus, they've also updated their web format to make it so that it's very difficult for farmers that depend obviously on good forecasts for planning they have been unable to get that information. So I haven't heard back from the minister yet, but I've heard that from a few people over the last number of months, and I've written the minister specifically on that one. So there was another question about finances. I got that. Let's go to Zoom, and I will go here. So a question around UNDRIP, and certainly this is one of those issues where you have a wide variance of opinions, and there's going to be a number of issues that I'm sure I'll get questions on where there's strong opinions on either side. I voted against the Bill C-15, which would have legislated UNDRIP, and especially during a time where a lot of Canadians are talking about reconciliation, there is some concern that why would Conservatives vote against this? Well, a big part of the reason for that is because the bill itself doesn't do what the government says it does. And specifically, there's something considered the duty to consult, and it gets really complicated into the language of both UNDRIP and the specifics around this bill, and where Canada's relationship with First Nations stands. Canada is one of the only countries on the planet that actually has the relationship between our country and First Nations as a part of our Constitution. This isn't the Indian Act. This is the relationship with First Nations. And part of the problem with the bill that the Liberals had put forward is that it leaves a tremendous amount of uncertainty about what consultations look like, and what happens if, for example, there are First Nations in Alberta that support resource development. Does that mean that a group from somewhere else in the country could oppose that First Nations community from being able to develop natural resources like the oil sands or something to that effect? Real concerns there that need to be addressed, yet the government decided to play politics instead of addressing them specifically. So that did pass. I believe it was second reading, and it's going to be studied at committee, where Conservatives will work diligently to try and get needed amendments to that bill, while also acknowledging the importance of reconciliation with First Nations communities. Ron asked a question about Bill C-21. When it comes to firearms, I am a licensed firearm owner, and I understand your concerns. And I'll tell you, it is unbelievably frustrating to see how it's law-abiding firearms owners that have the target on their back, no pun intended, by this Liberal government. They should be targeting those who are committing the crimes, repeat offenders. Yet instead of that, the Liberals they did it before under Jean Chrétien and the long gun registry, a multi-billion-dollar boondoggle, and now they're doing it again. And what's worse is they brought forward a gun grab in the midst of a tragedy that took place in the midst of a global pandemic, and tried to claim that this is about public safety. Folks, this is not about public safety, and even the minister the Minister of Public Safety, Bill Blair, has a very complicated record when it comes to this issue, because he was actually a police chief, so he knows full well that it's gangs and drugs and organized criminal activity that is the big problem here, not law-abiding firearms owners. And even just to see some of the absurd regulations, whether it be Bill C-21, where they actually accidentally banned airsoft and paintball guns. And then they told, wow, that's conservative fear-mongering. That's what the Liberals said. And then all of a sudden, when they got clarification from the Justice Department, that said, no, they accidentally banned that. It's incredibly frustrating that is the way that they approach some of these very, very important issues, especially when rural crime and organized crime in our urban centers are real issues, including the illegal use of firearms. But it's not farmers and sportsmen; it is gangs and illegal activity that is driving that. So and just another quick example, and I don't want to take too much more time on this, but the Liberals ordering council gun grab back in last year had it was so ambiguous and poorly thought out that they banned some guns that don't even actually exist in the list that they added. But They also accidentally banned 12-gauge shotguns, and then they say, "Oh, well, just trust us. We know what we're doing." Well, Canadians understand that the Liberals on this issue and many others simply cannot be trusted. Okay, so I'm going to try to get. Oh, so the next question, and there's a few questions on this actually of related to. Related to Bill C10, and I hear you. And Conservatives are fighting against Bill C10. Let me summarize that for those on the call that might not be familiar with what C10 is. Basically proposes some updates to the Broadcasting Act in Canada. Now, the Broadcasting Act generally applies to, big telecoms and large television stations and radio stations and whatnot. And there's Canadian content rules and whatnot that have been debated from time to time for a long time. So what the Liberals first introduced with Bill C10 was some updates to include web giants like Facebook, YouTube, other Netflix, other streaming services to supposedly level the playing field. Now, Conservatives were concerned when this was introduced because it looked like they were giving too much authority to the CRTC to manage the content of these streaming services. And at that time, there were actually some pretty clear exemptions that said user-generated content will not be affected. So Conservatives didn't support it in the beginning because we were concerned about this legislation. But then it passed with the support of the other opposition parties, not Conservatives. Conservatives voted against it. And then went to committee, where something very interesting happened. The Liberals did something sneaky. They removed the what was the initial exemption of user-generated content, and created a tremendous amount of ambiguity around what the CRTC would be able to regulate. And then they've lied about it since. In fact, the minister the other day during question period, when asked a question from a Conservative MP from Alberta, Rachel Harder from Lethbridge, said, "We don't want to regulate the internet. We just want to regulate some of the internet." Well, Canadians don't trust the government to censor free speech and to pick winners and losers in that regard. And I've heard from actually a wide cross-section of Canadians that aren't even just Conservatives, aren't even just Westerners, but these include TikTok creators that have millions of fans around the world, and they're worried that it's now the government that is going to be in control of what makes it to the top of the list when it comes to user-generated content, and then a whole bunch of money that gets funneled to people that the CRTC, which I have some real concerns about the lack of accountability within that organization, what they get to pick. That's not right. That's censorship. And Conservatives are fighting tooth and nail against this. Now, unfortunately, you have the Liberals teaming up with the other left-leaning opposition parties in this country to pass this and not be honest about the possible consequences. While Conservatives are being honest about it, we're not taking the Liberal spin and rhetoric. We are poking holes in it. We did that in question period today, and we've been doing that every day over the last number of months, and we'll continue to do that and make sure a clear promise has been made that if Conservatives win the next election, Bill C10 will be repealed. Okay. So I've got a couple of questions about climate change and the environment. So and I've heard a lot from constituents about both the Liberals' environmental plan and the announcement that Erin O'Toole, the leader of Canada's Conservatives, made regarding a Conservative plan. Let me clarify a few things. One, the Conservatives are committed and remain committed to scrapping the Liberals' environmental plan. And we have, even in the midst of opposition, where we're not in government, we have been diligently working to do things like exempt farmers from the carbon tax, something that's only fair. And especially when you look at the contribution that they make, whether it be the sequestration of emissions, whatever the case is. But then there's been some very, very valid questions about the Conservative environmental plan. And there's a number of parts of that. So please send me an email if you want the full details. And my email is damien.currick@parle.gc.ca. But the Conservative plan does a few things. It does price carbon. And I know that's not popular with a lot of you. But it does something very, very different than the Liberals' plan. One, it rejects the wealth transfer side of the plan, where disproportionately my constituents, many of you who are watching, I do see that there's a few from other parts of the country, but disproportionately, rural people pay more in the carbon tax, yet weren't getting more back from the Liberals. Plus, there was a lack of accountability in terms of the administration of the program, the dollars that were being handed out, and on the questions go. So what Conservatives have suggested on an issue that many Canadians care about, and in fact, we heard a lot during the last election. I heard about it in Battle River Crowfoot, and when I helped some other candidates in other parts of the country, especially urban centers, they would say, well, why don't Conservatives have an environmental plan? Well, folks, the Liberals have unfortunately, I think, because their plans are always talk and little action and simply big government overreach. And really accomplish very little. In fact, Donald Trump has a better record on emissions reduction than Justin Trudeau did, and over the same period of time. And yet Justin Trudeau claims to somehow be this environmental champion. Well, it's Conservatives that actually have a very, very strong record on the environment. But when it came to the specific issue about carbon, Canadians simply weren't satisfied. So and I know some of you won't be happy with this, but Aaron O'Toole made the decision with significant consultation and looking at the options to say, let's find a path forward that respects taxpayers so that every dollar that gets spent ends up back in the control of the person that paid that price. And then we'll figure out a framework that ensures that Canadians can improve their environmental footprint. And that's what was presented. Now, there's a big thing here that is key. Conservatives will respect provinces. We saw the Liberals force their plan on Canadian provinces that clearly rejected it. That's wrong, and Conservatives will never do that. This is an option that provinces will have before them, or they can come up with their own plans, and Conservatives will respect provinces because that's how our federation was meant to work. Other parts of the plan, there's one part that I personally quite like, and that's that we will ensure that there is a tariff on foreign imported energy from jurisdictions that are less environmentally responsible than Canada. A lot of Conservatives have been asking for that for a long time, yet because of our previous policy, that wasn't possible. So, and there's a number of other aspects, including, and I know there was a question, I think by Jackie related to SMRs. So small nuclear reactors, and this is an emerging technology. Lots of research still needs to be done. That is a potential way that we could generate sustainable, long-term, consistent energy in a way that could benefit especially rural Canada. And as a rural MP and as somebody who has fought diligently for rural interests over and over throughout my entire time, both elected and prior, it's important that we have that rural lens applied to this. And so that's some on the environmental plan. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask them. And like I said, if I don't get a chance to get to them, do send me an email. I will be sure to get back to you. Okay, so I'm going to go to Facebook here. A comment from Jim and Val saying that they'd love to watch this if their internet works. So I'm just going to take this opportunity. Conservatives believe very, very clearly that we need a strategy to get high quality broadband across rural Canada. And it's unfortunate that the plans that the Liberals have revealed or have unveiled and then sometimes re-unveil and then sometimes re-announce those plans are simply not working for Canadians. And part of it is I don't think they understand the dynamics that are faced in rural, whether that be a dead zone or a farmer that or a group of farms around a a rural road or a community that simply doesn't have access to that broadband, absolutely essential. We've been advocating for you every step of the way in terms of the Liberal government, and I think you're going to be really, really pleased with some of the plans that we bring forward when it comes to how we would handle things differently. There's a question about, I know there's a few questions about China, and I'll get into the specifics around China here in a few minutes, but just specifically around Huawei. You know, Conservatives, it's a shame that Canada is the only Five Eyes. Now, Five Eyes, for those of you who are not aware, is five like-minded countries that share intelligence. So like you know, our spy agencies, for lack of a better word, share intelligence. And Canada has refused, even though Parliament has told the government they need to ban Huawei, which is a state-controlled enterprise that's owned by the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China. And it's nonsensical, the government's refusal to act on this issue, when all other comparable jurisdictions have said no to Huawei when it comes to 5G. I'll leave that one at that. A question about internet and the high prices that are faced. We're working on specific policies, Terry Lynn, around how to make sure that it's more affordable for consumers, how to ensure that it's accessible in rural areas, how to make sure that there's that a whole bunch of these issues are addressed. And unlike the Liberals that in the last election simply announced that they would cut cell phone bills by 25%, yet had no plan to get there. And then they actually stood up in the House of Commons and took credit for that the other day. And yet there's been absolutely no action taken. So we're looking at some specifics as to how we can encourage competition, ensure that there is the ability for Canadians to be able to afford what is an essential service, especially that's been demonstrated during COVID, and that rural broadband, rural internet, cell phones are absolutely essential for the ability for Canadians to be able to live and work. And when it comes to entertainment, in fact, my family doesn't even have a DVD player anymore, because with the internet you simply don't need one, whether it's Netflix or other streaming services. Okay, so let me. I'm just scrolling through here. Sorry, folks. So. Okay, so an update on Bill C69, and then I'll go back over to Zoom and get to some of the questions. I've been answering some questions off of Facebook, and then I'll get back to Zoom. So Bill C69 was passed in the last Parliament, and it's interesting because provinces were opposed to it, yet the Liberals went ahead. Showed a tremendous lack of respect for the way that Canada was supposed to operate, how our federation was supposed to operate. And I understand, folks, I'll take this opportunity to share, I understand why so many are frustrated with the status of our federation, are feeling like they're giving up hope on Canada. Folks, I'd encourage you to not let one individual, a prime minister that runs this country more like a dictatorship than a democracy. Do not let a Trudeau destroy the country that you and I love. And I would encourage you to not give up hope. Bill C69 is one of those examples where mismanagement drives distrust, drives regional divisions, and shows how poorly the current government is managing national issues. Bill C69, which is the No Pipelines bill, and Bill C48, which was the tanker ban on only the West Coast, not on the East Coast, where foreign oil actually comes into the country. It demonstrated how unbelievably frustrating the policies of a government that don't care about our nation. And Conservatives are committed to repealing both of those. Now, the reason why we haven't been able to repeal them, it's not because we haven't tried. It's because we didn't win the last election. Well, folks, that's where the next election, is so important. And um, and that's why we continue to work diligently each and every day to share our common sense, positive message for this country that would truly get Canada back on track. Okay, so let me get back to Zoom. So there's a question from Sharon about why life lease folks did not get a household census. That's a great question, Sharon. I'd encourage you to send me an email because I don't know the specific reason for that. Chances are it's because generally you have to be registered at that address. So if it's either you've recently moved there or haven't filed taxes from there or haven't registered to vote from there, you often don't get a census. But if you want to send me an email, we can look into the specifics of that. And I know that there's a number of others that have reached out to my office concerns about the census, whether it be folks that are coming into their yards without permission during a pandemic, which makes no sense at all, whether it be short timelines for requesting mail-in census when you don't have access to the internet, or just some of the confusing aspects of that. Very, very frustrating, and I hear you, and those are issues that we are both looking into and helping out where we can in terms of the current situation, and making sure that hopefully when the next census comes around, it's Conservatives in charge to make sure that it's more customer focused, make sure that it's focused on Canadians' best interests. Okay, so Anthony asked a question about since the pandemic, are services going to resume to pre-pandemic levels? Anthony, absolutely, and it's good to see that there's some optimism going forward. So it was announced today that 64% of Albertans have received at least one dose of the vaccine, and the province has decided on a metric to see that as part of the path to reopen permanently, safely, and so that we can get back to normal, so that we can do things like hug our grandparents, and which it's been way too long since I've hugged my grandmas. Be able to do things like eat in restaurants, not wear masks, all of those things. Those things are coming, and I am encouraged by some of the steps that have been taken, and there's, I think, a reason to be optimistic, folks. And Anthony, I think that the Premier has talked about, and I know that I'm federal, and your MLAs and the Premier are provincial, but I've listened to the Premier share about how there's a plan to get back to normal as soon as is possible in a safe way, so that the Canadians can, whether it be do the things that we've missed so much, or ensure that there's no restrictions on businesses who, let me tell you, folks, especially small and medium-sized businesses, have just borne the brunt of this pandemic. Conservatives have fought for supports where needed to help folks survive, but certainly it has been a real challenge for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and Conservatives have been fighting for you. But I know that we are looking forward to being able to get back to normal. So some questions around the treatment of COVID. And some of the alternative treatments that have been presented, and there's a couple of questions on that. So I'll simply answer it this way. It is so frustrating that there has been this hyper politicization of some very valid questions that Canadians have, whether it be related to treatments about the pandemic or about COVID, whether it be vaccines, whatever the case is. It's been so frustrating that it's been hyper politicized to the point where you can't even question what the government is saying. Well, the scientific consensus may be clear on a lot of these things, but what is also clear is the respect that not everybody agrees, and to be able to have an informed discussion is absolutely necessary. And certainly for myself, I work diligently to read, and I have read a ton of stuff sent by I know some of the folks on this call, and thousands of other constituents. About varying opinions and perspectives, and frustrations in many cases about this or that, or some variation on what the government's saying. And a good example is when there were valid questions about the origins of COVID, that was considered a conspiracy theory back about a year ago. Yet now we're learning that intelligence agencies in the United States are actually doing a fulsome investigation of that. That it's been revealed that a top secret microbiology lab that's owned by the government of Canada in Winnipeg actually transported some very infectious diseases to China. There's a lot of unanswered questions about lack of accountability, and yet those concerns were dismissed in the beginning, and then it drives distrust. You should be able to trust your government, and unfortunately, we have seen time and time again a rising level of distrust, and I hear you on that. And I'm a small town farm kid from Consort, Alberta. I grew up in this area. I'm passionate about representing rural Alberta, making sure that concerns are heard in Ottawa. And I know that Canadians can be trusted to have a real dialogue. And it's unfortunate that there are many that simply don't trust. So whether it be some of the questions around treatments of COVID, vaccines, COVID itself, there's valid questions. And then there's also having to be realistic and take a balanced approach. Just because one doctor says something doesn't mean that that doctor's perspective is infallible, when there's maybe 1,000 doctors on the other side that suggest the otherwise. And it's so important that that government acknowledges the divergent opinions that exist, but then focus on ensuring that there's a balanced approach and making policy the best informed policy possible, and being honest with Canadians about it. And unfortunately, we have not seen that. So just a comment about thanking for the re-election clarification. Glad to have been able to clarify that for folks that have just tuned in. The first question that I answered, because I've heard a lot about this in the last bit, is that somehow Parliament voted to suspend elections permanently, and some variations of that. Not true. And if you have specific questions, please feel free to and I just see that there's another question there. Please feel free to email if you want more clarification on that. But rather, it was not suspending elections in this country, but it was calling out a prime minister that has demonstrated that he will do anything to try to get back his parliamentary majority, including do things like manipulate the democratic process. And folks, Conservatives will not stand for that. So that's what Motion 118 was about. When it comes to confidence and the way that elections operate in this country, it's very, very clear that that is still the way that things go. Motion 118, a non-binding motion calling the Prime Minister out that for his in some cases blatant attempts to circumvent Parliament, circumvent democratic institutions for political advantage. And I could go into a lot more details on that, but I'll simply use one more example that I didn't use earlier. When the pandemic started, it was clear that supports were needed. So Conservatives said, look, we'll work with the government as long as there's clear accountability and a framework to get back to normal, and a whole bunch of other things that Conservatives made very, very clear. The Liberals lied about that and instead brought forward initially a bill that would have given them unlimited spending and taxation authority for a year and a half. We would be just coming to the conclusion of that unlimited taxation and spending authority. Well, folks, that goes against every aspect of our parliamentary tradition. Every spending measure needs to be brought through Parliament, needs to be debated, needs to be held accountable. Yet you have a government that has shown that they do not respect our history, the rule of law, and our democratic institutions. Conservatives have not given up on fighting to ensure that there's accountability at every level. Okay, let me look at the next question here. Okay, so I think I've got to the bottom of the questions on Zoom. So if you have a question, do feel free to submit that on. Oh, and there's some other ones. Sorry, guys. I was looking at the comments, but not all the questions. There's a question from Gordon about cancel culture, and Gordon, I am very concerned about how it seems that if somebody says a little bit of the wrong thing, they simply get canceled by a social media mob. That's very concerning. That's not how politics, that's not how dialogue, that's not how democracy is meant to work. And I know that there's going to be a lot of questions related to things like residential schools, those involved in those policies. In fact, I'm sure that the Prime Minister should be having some very serious conversations about his father's role in those things. Jean Chrétien, for example, was Pierre Trudeau's Indian Affairs Minister back in, I believe it was the 60s and 70s. So very, very serious questions have to be asked, and to simply try to hide our history is not, I would suggest, a viable path forward. If we don't learn from our history, if we aren't honest about our history, there's some real concerns there. So cancel culture is very concerning, and it doesn't show the strength of our democratic systems. We are built as a civil society on the ability to have conversations, difficult sometimes, but we have to be able to have that dialogue, and to somehow allow that to be replaced with an issue that's in 140 characters or less on Twitter is very, very concerning. So thanks, Gordon, for that. Okay, and just going through a few more of the questions here, folks. Thanks very much for everybody who is tuning in. I'm glad for the opportunity to be able to speak with all of you. It's an honor to be able to serve you in Parliament, and I know that there are a lot of frustrations, concerns that we're facing as a country, as a province, and as a region, and it is an honor to be on the front lines fighting for you in the midst of those things. Anita asked a question about borrowing from the IMF. Anita, most of the borrowing that's taken place is the Bank of Canada doing two things. One is something called quantitative easing, which is basically just injecting cash into the economy, which leads to, in some cases, and what we're seeing now, inflation, which is a whole nother big concern. And that's basically where the value of the Canadian dollar is lessened, meaning that you can't purchase as much, which drives the cost of everything up. And what happens is inevitably interest rates rise. So that's one side of things, but also buying bonds and locking in terms, because Canada has generally been a strong fiscal have a strong fiscal management record. Canada's a pretty attractive place for bonds to be purchased from, and because of low interest rates, there's a lot of you can borrow at a pretty low rate. But when it comes to whether the rising inflation, one of the ways that a central bank can control rising inflation is to increase interest rates. So the very mechanisms that are being used to inject dollars into the economy will inevitably cost taxpayers. And that's why borrowing has consequences, why we have to have a strong fiscal framework. And I find it really rich that the government, that the Liberals will say, well, we're in the best fiscal position of many. Well, often they don't actually look at the whole picture. They pick and choose the numbers. They don't look at the fact that Canada is a federation versus other jurisdictions like the United Kingdom or Japan, where they calculate debt differently. And so Canada is not in as good a position as the Liberals like to talk about. And then in terms of the borrowing capacity, they often say that Canada's in a strong fiscal situation to borrow dollars. I find that really, really ironic, because the reason why we're in a strong fiscal situation is because there was, for a decade prior to Justin Trudeau being elected, a government that actually understood what fiscal accountability was about. So it's frustrating that they, in one moment, they talk about how Canada's in a strong position, and in the other, they talk about uncontrolled spending. And yet, folks, you and I know, if I didn't manage my household budget responsibly, we'd see out of control debt, and I wouldn't be able to afford to feed my family, afford a place to live, vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. It's unfortunate, the situation that we're getting ourselves into. And I know I was asked a question as well, I believe, about how whether we can dig ourselves out of this, and that's a fair question, and that's why we need a change. We need fiscal accountability. And because I believe that it's not too late, there's still hope for this country. There's still hope to be able to get out of the fiscal mess we're in by encouraging investment again, getting people back to work, and while keeping taxes low. I believe we can do those things, but it is going to take some. It's going to take a lot of work, and it has to happen. I would suggest soon. And you look at the fiscal projections, and that's why I would suggest that it has to happen soon. So there's also another question regarding the lending term. So I think I've answered that. So Norm asked a question about the federal role in opening up international borders and freedom of travel, and the need to quarantine in airports. It's interesting because when I'm on the public safety committee, and we demanded answers on the whole conversation surrounding the reason why these hotel quarantines were brought into place, and they literally said that there was that they had no evidence for the policies that they brought forward, but were and I'm paraphrasing, but just hoping it would work because they thought it would. And it's very, very frustrating. That's been the response to many aspects of this, whether it be not closing the borders early to hotspots and then using a hammer instead of a scalpel, so to speak. When it comes to addressing some of these concerns. And I know I've heard from a lot of constituents, and this is one of those divisive issues. There's some on one side of the equation that want borders to remain closed, and others that don't. Well, let's have an evidence-based policy that talks about how to ensure that Canadians can get back to normal safely. Conservatives were the first and only national political party to call for a plan to permanently and safely reopen Canada. We called for that months ago. And had that's notwithstanding the vaccine procurement debacle that left Canada far behind other parts of the world. But Canadians, the reason why we debated that, even though the Liberals and other parties called us fearmongers or irresponsible or various other things, the reason why we debated that is because we believe that Canadians deserved certainty. And it's the same thing when it comes to the border. We have examples where the Trudeau government has refused to allow Canadians to cross the border to get a vaccine. And even though they failed time and time again when it comes to the procurement of those vaccines domestically, very, very frustrating. And Conservatives will continue to hold the government to account in every way possible, and to push for getting back to normal in a safe way, including ensuring that there's a plan to reopen international borders, whether that be, I've heard from constituents that are looking forward to being able to travel again, that are rodeo participants, whatever the case is. Canadians deserve a plan and accountability, and ensure that we get back there. Okay, so let me look here. So with foreign oil coming into Canada, there's a question from Darlene. This is one of those concerns that Conservatives keep talking about. I'm proud to support the Canadian energy industry. We produce the most ethically, environmentally, sustainably produced energy on the planet. And Alberta has some of the largest oil reserves on the planet. It's interesting that other political parties will say that they want to phase out the oil sands, say that they don't want oil and gas, yet in some cases, and there's a story back when I attended a Conservative convention in Halifax back a number of years ago. There was an anti-oil, anti-energy protest taking place on the harbor front. Literally across the harbor, there was the unloading facility for for oil tankers. That's the sort of hypocrisy we see in this country. Conservatives call it out. We have been and will continue to, and ensure that we fight for Canadian interests, including our energy sector. And it's incredibly frustrating that we see foreign oil displacing Canadian oil when we could have a pipeline, more pipeline capacity that doesn't depend on the Americans, doesn't depend on ships. And back when oil prices were reduced significantly because of the pandemic last year, we actually saw Eastern refineries purchasing Alberta oil. So that sounds like a good thing. But here's a catch, folks. It was being shipped via pipeline out to the West Coast, traveling down through the Panama Canal, the Gulf of Mexico, and up the eastern seaboard to the St. Lawrence Seaway. That sort of energy policy is unbelievable. Yet it's MPs that represent some of those jurisdictions that fight against things like pipelines, a safe way to transport energy. So thanks for that question. Teresa asks a question about how do we stop Trudeau from destroying our country? Great question. And I assure you the Conservatives are fighting each and every day for accountability, for something called good governance. Now, if you've been to some of my campaign events and different things, I talk a lot about the idea of good governance. It's actually mentioned very clearly in our Constitution, and it's something I'm passionate about, because it's about making the right decisions, not based on political best interests, but the right decisions because it's the right thing to do. Ensuring that there's accountability, whether that be in the finances, whether that be in democracy, whether that be in our institutions, whatever the case is, ensuring that there's good governance in this country, that there's strong ethics, that there's the Canadian values are protected at home and abroad. That is absolutely key. And Conservatives have a plan to make sure that we can bring good ethical governance back to this country. And you're going to hear Conservatives talk a lot about securing our future. And the very basis of that is the ideas and reality of what good governance can do to repair the damage that's been done to this country. And the thing about good governance is it really transcends politics. Now, I'd suggest that those are basic Conservative principles. The principles that us in rural Alberta have just considered a part of our way of life. Those principles are what make up good governance. And that's what Conservatives have to offer. And the cool thing is that really transcends traditional political boundaries. And we're starting to see more and more folks from across the country look at that and say, wait a second, I don't trust the Liberals. Even if they don't necessarily agree always with Conservatives, they're saying they don't trust the current situation. And Conservatives are ready to fight for what's right, bring good governance back. Okay, so good question. Thank you very much for that. Darlene asked about vaccine passports. I'm opposed to vaccine passports. I think that that's a health decision that somebody should make. I think vaccines are a very important tool to help us get back to normal, but it should be up to Canadians to make that choice for themselves. And I know that the provincial government has addressed some of the challenges around mandatory vaccines and whatnot, but that vaccine passports is one of those ethically gray areas that is very, very concerning to people. And I'm opposed to vaccine passports because it is requiring something of Canadians that may or may not go against their values. And look, I chose to get vaccinated, yet I oppose vaccine passports. And I think that that's one of those important conversations that have to be had, and to figure out exactly how to address when other jurisdictions do require them, whether it be other provinces, which I hope is not the case, or if it's a private company or an international a country that says you need to be vaccinated, or a cruise ship. There's a whole bunch of questions that have to be answered. And here's the key, folks, and this actually relates back to good governance. There has to be an honest conversation with Canadians about it. And unfortunately, we have not seen that yet, but certainly Conservatives will endeavor to both bring accountability to that issue and ensure that there's an honest, frank conversation around that. Okay, the Trans Mountain project. Tony asks about the status of that, and it's underway. It's being built. There's been some challenges. It's delayed, and the costs are going up. And unfortunately, the reality is that the Liberals drove investment out of this country to the point where the only way that they could get a pipeline built, and even the Liberals, the anti-energy, left-leaning Liberals, acknowledged that a pipeline was important. Even they acknowledge that, and it is a situation where their only option was to then buy the pipeline. And although there's been some delays and there's some challenges associated with that, there has been work being done. In fact, I try to stay up to date on that as much as possible to make sure that the Liberals can't get away with just death by delay like they have on a number of other energy projects. And because it's absolutely essential that we can get our resources to market our good, ethical Canadian, Western Canadian resources. Okay, so there is another question about vaccine passports. So Dave, I did answer that before. So if you have further questions or comments or things that you want me to pass on to whether it's Conservative colleagues or the government, make sure you do send it to me. My email is damien.currick@parle.gc.ca. I always appreciate being able to hear from constituents. Gordon asked a question about Line 5 and the Michigan, the threat from the Michigan governor about shutting down that pipeline. And this is I see it's after 8 o'clock, so I'll keep going for a few more minutes here. But so I won't get into the specifics, but basically Line 5 is a pipeline that supplies Eastern Canada with a whole bunch of energy. It's not just crude oil. There's other types of energy that are used that are transported, and it goes under the Straits of Mackinac. I believe is how you say it, and it's the Michigan governor threatened to shut it down. Now this is where the hypocrisy is shown very, very clear, both in terms of the Michigan governor, but also the Liberal government here in Canada. You had only weeks before the Liberals capitulated on KXL, which I fought very, very hard for, and it's been disappointing to not see that project go ahead. What would have been another avenue for us to get our resources to market. Yet the same defense was used by the Michigan governor in her path, her push to shut down Line 5. And you have the government of Canada stuck in a situation where they're faced with their hypocrisy. And that pipeline is an older pipeline. It's actually in the process of being replaced. So a lot of the concerns surrounding it are actually mute because it will be replaced in only a couple of years. There's a concrete tunnel being built underneath this waterway, so to ensure that it's safe going forward. Yet that hypocrisy is being demonstrated. Now, the deadline passed. The Michigan governor is still talking tough about it. There's some ongoing court cases. We're waiting to see what those next steps are, and we've been working very hard to make sure that Canadians across the country know how impactful this shutdown would be, both on our economy, energy security. Just imagine if in the middle of winter this pipeline was shut down, it would devastate hundreds of thousands, millions of households. All of ironically, the fuel used at Pearson International Airport in Toronto comes from Line 5. So just imagine how impactful that would be. Okay, I'm going to get to some of the pre-written questions here, folks. Try to get through a few more before we go over the. We're a little bit over time, but I'll keep going for a bit because I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to constituents during a time when it's been challenging to connect. And I understand that. So whether it's a forum like this, which I appreciate, whether it's by phone, and I know there's a couple people on this call that I've actually tried to call a couple of times and haven't been able to connect. We're playing a bit of telephone tag. I look forward to being able to connect with those folks, but make sure you do reach out. And I also sent a letter to constituents. I tried some addressed mail, and for those of you who are curious about how I got your address, don't worry. It's a safe and secure way that MPs. That's an option that MPs have to contact their constituents using the list of electors. So it's probably some of you received some mail that maybe had past residents or wasn't quite accurate, but it's a tool that MPs have to be able to connect with their constituents that I wanted to ensure that I was using to stay connected with you, to give you a bit of an update, share about this town hall. And I appreciate all the folks that have been able to join here this evening and those who will watch later. But certainly there's a lot more to I'm really excited to be able to get back to normal and see many of you in person. So thank you very much for joining us here tonight, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay, so there's a couple questions about immigration, and I'll take this opportunity. Now I'm not sure that I'm going to say this right, but Finn and Rob, please feel free to reach out to my office. Feel free to send me an email. attention Amy. She's my casework manager, and we'll do everything we can to help you out with your specific concern. I won't get into the specifics on a public town hall, but my office has some great people that will do everything we can to assist with whether it's an immigration file or another concern related to the federal government. It's not just immigration, but please do feel free to reach out. There's a question around a universal dental plan, and I've heard from a number of constituents on this, and I know it's been debated a little bit. Now, it hasn't been debated seriously on a national level, and look, my brother-in-law is a dentist, and you know, I mentioned earlier that I'd worked for a provincial government previously, and you see some of the consequences of health policy, and dental health is a part of health, and it's ensuring that there is access, whether it's to prescription drugs, filling in the gaps for those who do not currently have prescription drug coverage. That's something that Conservatives have been very, very clear on supporting, but also not burdening Canadians with a massive, inefficient program. And it's finding the right balance on these issues. And specifically, Daniel, if you have some suggestions about that, I'd love to hear them, especially as we're likely going into you know, what could be a fall election. Justin Trudeau, in a couple of interviews over the Christmas holidays, he said, well, we're going into an election next year, and so likely we'll see that. Minority parliaments are tenuous. It's possible that we could see the government defeated and go into an election, which relates to that M118 question as well. But so Daniel, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how to do that. There's a question by Rodney related to water prices. Generally, that's a municipal concern. So I'd encourage you to speak to your local town council. This references Highway 14. So whether you're in a county, talk to your county councillor, your local reeve, or if you're in one of the communities along Highway 14, talk to your local mayor council, and sometimes the CAO of your local community will have a lot of those answers. So feel free to talk to them. And if there's concerns with that, you can reach out to your MLA, because municipal governments fall under the jurisdiction of the provincial government. So Rodney, I'd encourage you to reach out to first your municipal elected officials. Okay, so there's a question by Leo about the Fiscal Arrangements Act, and some of the interprovincial agreements, and generally, Leo, I'm going to kind of expand this question to include just the big question of equalization, an issue that's on the forefront of almost every Albertan's mind. Equalization. What's the deal with it? I'll tell you, this is at the very, you know, from a macro level, this is where good governance comes into to be a key part of the conversation. It is unbelievably frustrating where you see a lack of willingness on the part of the federal government to engage with their provincial counterparts, and that's why we're in the equalization mess we're in. The Trudeau government, instead of working with provinces to come up to a new agreement when circumstances have changed, it's meant to be renegotiated on a regular basis, I believe it's a 5-year term. And to ensure that the equalization formula, which generally, as long as it's fair, generally even Albertans don't mind, but it's when it punishes a certain region of the country that frustrates Canadians beyond belief. And I think that's where we see a failure for that, again, that term that I sometimes feel like I overuse, but good governance. And Conservatives are committed to restoring the federal government's relationship with provinces. Whether you agree with the politics of a province or not, that shouldn't matter. It's about working with your provincial counterparts, working in the best interests of Canadians. And unfortunately, we don't see that. When it comes to some of the specifics around equalization, we've encouraged change. In fact, a colleague of mine, Tom Kimmich, has actually tabled a private member's bill to change some of the aspects of the equalization formula. I know the provincial government is promising a referendum on equalization in the fall. There's a number of these issues, and it's absolutely key that Albertans feel like they're a valued part of the federation, not simply the bank that you can withdraw from, but when Alberta needs help, like we've faced really challenging times over the last number of years, yet you see other jurisdictions refuse to allow things like pipelines to go forward that actually hurt the entire country, not just Alberta, but it hurts the entire country. Conservatives are fighting for all of Canada, and that benefits Alberta. That's why I can so confidently say the Conservatives are the right choice for Alberta, because we're fighting for Alberta, because we're fighting for a better Canada that includes all of us, whether it be issues like equalization, where there'd be fairness, where there'd be transparency, where there'd be some tough conversations around jurisdictions that are discouraging energy development. Yet Alberta being punished for being the best in the world at something is not acceptable. Conversations that need to happen, that I'm proud to be able to ask those tough questions. And I'm one of those MPs that has asked ministers, asked Liberals, and continue to whenever I have the opportunity, demanding answers, asking some of those questions. In fact, I asked straight out, are the Liberals trying to drive Alberta out of the federations for political benefit? And they didn't like that question very much, but I asked it because that's unacceptable. And folks, Conservatives are fighting for Albertans and Alberta. I know there's 33 Alberta Conservative MPs, and we are working diligently each and every day. And if you want to find out more about that, I'd be happy to share the reasons and the ways that we're doing that, from fighting against government overreach, fighting for fiscal accountability, fighting against the current equalization formula. We are standing up for Albertans. Okay, let me look here. So Selena had asked a question about quarantine for fully vaccinated folks. It's frustrating that there's just a whole bunch of misinformation. We see the United States providing guidance on things, yet Canada is refusing to move in that direction surrounding the CDC's mask mandate, for example. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration about that, and I think that a lot of this comes down to the simple fact that Canada is far behind the rest of the world when it comes to ensuring we're ready to start the process of reopening. I'm optimistic it's going to happen, but the third wave of COVID could have been entirely avoided had we had vaccines at a time when other comparable jurisdictions had them, and we're now seeing the benefits of those vaccines and the significant drop in case counts and whatnot. But it's unfortunate, and the billions of dollars lost. Justin Trudeau needs to be held accountable for the third wave that was entirely avoidable, that entirely is his fault. So I know those are strong words, folks, but you look at other jurisdictions that were opening while Canada was locking down. One person to blame for that, and that's the Prime Minister and the mismanagement of this file. Okay, Kathy asks a question about travel agents, and this is one of those examples. Conservatives have been fighting for some of those folks that have fallen through the cracks, and I know independent travel agents are one of those groups of people, disproportionately women. These are small business owners that have not qualified for many of the supports in an industry that has been devastated by COVID-19. And Kathy, I continue to fight for this. I presented a petition here just the other day in the House of Commons, and continue to fight for clarity and ensure that there's a plan to ensure that travel can open again, and that there is the supports needed to help small business owners like yourself survive. Okay, so I think that gets through most of the. There is one other question here, sorry, that I got from Jade about some social issues, and look, there are some very, very controversial issues that all parliamentarians have to address, and certainly I have values and principles that I'm proud of, and I represent a constituency where there's although according to the election results, it's pretty clearly conservative. That doesn't mean that everybody agrees. And you know what? That's okay. We have to have room in this country for respectful dialogue on all the tough issues, including social issues. And certainly, if you have some specifics about this, I would be happy to dialogue further with you. I appreciate your question, because as as a as a member of Parliament, I understand first that these are issues that have to be approached with respect, because there are divergent opinions, valid and divergent opinions on these issues. Second, that there are ways that we can find consensus. Yet it's unfortunate there are some who would simply hyper-politicize some of these issues, like Bill C233 regarding gender selection. It's an issue that I hoped would unite Canadians. Yet, unfortunately, we see it being used as a political wedge, when I think that much could have been accomplished that a lot of Canadians agree with. And then specifically, when it comes to the issues around pro-life issues, I am pro-life, and I know that not everybody agrees with that, and I'd ask that you respect that opinion, and I respect your disagreement, and I take seriously the need to represent you. And when it comes to an issue like Bill C6, I heard from hundreds and hundreds of constituents on Bill C6 and also on Bill C7. And some real dialogue took place, and I did my best to ensure that I'm representing my constituents and holding true to my principles, and I did vote against both of those bills. And if you have further questions, please do feel free to reach out. Okay, I'm going to go back to Facebook here and look through a couple of questions. And I know, thanks so much, folks, for joining in, for tuning into this. And if you have any further questions, or if I haven't gotten to them, I apologize. There's kind of three ways that you can ask questions. So I apologize if this is if I did miss a question. It's not intentional. Please feel free to send me an email, and I'd love to have a follow-up conversation. Okay, so Lois asked a question about the power of the Prime Minister, and what can we do? And Lois, you mentioned here that there's not really much we can do, and I hear your frustration. I see it, and in fact, I live a lot of that each and every day. But I'll tell you, the reason why we see the scandal and the mismanagement is because Conservatives and the opposition is hard at work holding the government to account. You wouldn't be seeing these challenges if it wasn't for the hard work of Conservatives across this country diligently fighting for you. So there's a lot more work that has to be done, especially in the lead up to whenever the next election is. And certainly Conservatives will bring forward a strong, positive vision to with a real plan for this country to secure our future, to secure our economy, to secure the future that we all deserve, quite frankly, including us in rural Alberta. Okay, let me look here as well. And look, I know there's a number of folks that are pretty cynical about the status quo. I get it, and I understand why. And let me simply say this: I am fighting diligently to ensure that you're represented. And I know we won't agree on everything. In fact, I'd be concerned if I said I agreed with everything that everybody believed, because I'd be lying. But here's the reality. In a democracy, we can have discussions. We can have a dialogue and an ability to ensure we figure out a path forward. And I believe, both as a rural, born and raised rural guy who's just working diligently for what he believes is right, and as a Conservative who believes in accountable, small government, the reality is this: we're so often closer to being united than we are being divided. And don't let a few voices divide when we can accomplish so much working together, whether that be in politics, whether that be in our communities, whether that be in our churches, whatever the case is, folks. I believe so much in the folks that I represent. Believe in their potential, in their future, and the ability to succeed. And that's why I'm so honored to be able to represent what I would suggest is one of the best regions of the country, the best region of the country. 53,000 square kilometers of beautiful East Central Alberta real estate. I'm so blessed to have that honor and privilege. Okay, let me try to get to a couple of other questions. I've answered a few of them. I'm just on Facebook here, so let me simply say, folks, if I don't get to your question, do make sure to send me an email, a message, and we'll get back to you, and appreciate that. So Rob asked a question about the number of people that have passed away from COVID, gotten sick, and I know there's a lot of information and misinformation, and there's numbers that sometimes change, and then there's questions about some of those numbers. But look, COVID posed some real health threats to our country, and I know that might be controversial to some. But I have personally had friends who've been seriously ill, generally healthy people, that have been seriously ill. Some friends who have passed away from COVID and the complications related to that. And I know it's unfortunate that sometimes even saying that can be controversial. But look, virtually every government around the world took it seriously, managed it differently, and that's why Conservatives have called for a full inquiry into Canada's COVID response to say, okay, what went right, what went wrong, and what do we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And it's absolutely key that we have those conversations, and because A, we can't afford to do this sort of thing indefinitely. And B, we need to ensure that we can protect the lives and the livelihoods of Canadians, and ensure that we learn lessons so that we don't have to go through this again. Okay, I've asked a number of, or I've answered a number of these questions, and okay, thanks very much from some folks that are thanking me for doing this. It's an honor to be able to connect with some of you. I know it's not necessarily as good as being in person. Look forward to being able to. In fact, I'm just starting to figure out a plan for the fall that would include some in-person town halls across the constituency. Really excited about that. So stay tuned. I'll be sure to make sure that there's a mail out and advertise those as much as possible. Okay, so Anita asked a question about the UN agenda, and I get that some people are really concerned. And look, when it comes down to it, Conservatives have made it very, very clear that international institutions and agencies need to reflect Canadian values, the strong values that we have as a country, and that needs to be reflected, whether it's our foreign policy, whether it's in the way that we approach entities like the UN, and in the various other international agencies that exist. Canada is a world leader and should be. It's unfortunate that we've seen that position diminish significantly over the course of the last 6 years of Justin Trudeau being Prime Minister. Okay, one final question that I got a number of people that had asked, and that's related to China. And this will be the last question that I ask. I know I've been on for about an hour and a half, so thanks for those of you who have stuck around, and I understand that there's others who have had to leave, but I wanted to try and get to as many answers as possible. Or as many questions as possible so that I could answer them. Look, there are some real challenges with Canada's relationship, Canada's place in the world generally, but specifically when it comes to the Communist Party of China. We see mismanagement of that file. We see the Prime Minister himself has said he admires their basic dictatorship. There's a whole host of other examples, whether it's the two Michaels, whether it be mistreatment of democracy activists, including where 300,000 Canadians live, which is in Hong Kong, whether it be increasing threats to Taiwan, and the ability for Taiwan to self-govern. There's a whole host of challenges, and we've seen the government mismanage that on so many levels, and it is incredibly frustrating. So Conservatives have gotten to work, whether it be addressing an issue that I referred to earlier, which was what appears to be the infiltration of state actors, Chinese communist state actors, into some of Canada's most secure facilities, whether it be relationships that have been promoted by the Liberals with our regards to our military and the People's Liberation Army, whether it be the concerns related to intellectual property. I'd mentioned Huawei before. There's a whole host of these concerns. But when Conservatives started asking questions, and here's why we kind of know we're on the right track, because instead of even just deflecting, the Prime Minister did something the other day in question period. Instead of deflecting or just not answering the question, which is too common in question period, he called Conservatives racist for asking questions about the communist regime in China. That is the exact technique that the communist regime in China uses to deflect from legitimate questions. And for our Prime Minister to use that as an excuse, we had a number we have a number of MPs who are of Asian descent who called the Prime Minister out on that, and he's yet to respond. But it is unbelievable that we would see that sort of thing happen in our democracy, and Conservatives are at the front on that. The first motion that we voted on, the first motion that I voted on as a member of Parliament in a minority Parliament, was to establish a committee that would investigate the current government's relationship with China. And a lot of the reason why we're finding out all this stuff is because of Conservatives' work on that committee. And I applaud their work, and Conservatives will not stop until we get to the bottom of a whole host of these issues. In fact, today we passed a motion that specifically related to that microbiology lab in Winnipeg. We're demanding answers. And even though the government doesn't like Parliament, sees Parliament as an inconvenience, they have no choice but to respond because Canada's democracy still exists. And I know that there's some pessimism around that, but look, there is our democracy, our Parliament is still there. You're not going to silence me. You're not going to silence Conservatives for getting to the bottom of a lot of this stuff. So that's the last question I'm going to ask. I've been here for about an hour and a half, folks. Thank you so much for joining me here this evening. Thanks for all those that have stuck around. And look, I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's an honor to be your member of Parliament. And please know that I am doing everything I can to represent you, whether we always agree on the issues or not. It is an honor to be your representative, your advocate in Canada's Parliament, standing up for this beautiful region of East Central Alberta. And look, there's a whole host of concerns we face, and I know there's probably other issues that I didn't get to, and if I happen to miss your question, please do feel free to send me an email, send me a message, send me a text, and I'm happy to be able to connect with you to further both this conversation and to work with you going forward. And even if it's just things that you think that I should see or be aware of, whether it's in your community, whatever the case is, make sure you reach out. The whole point of democracy is being connected with people. And that's why I'm doing things like this, but there are so many other opportunities to do that. And I'm excited to be able to do that in person again very, very soon. And like I said, we're planning some of those things that I'm excited about this summer too. I've talked to a number of communities that are, prepping for summer fairs and different activities. Very excited about that. And let me simply conclude with saying this. Thank you to all of you, the people, for your resilience in the midst of what has been an incredibly challenging time for our region, for our province, for our country. I have the utmost respect and admiration for each and every one of you, whether it's a small business owner, the teacher, the healthcare worker, the person who had lost their job and has faced really challenging times. Whether it's a new Canadian or somebody that's been around for many generations, thank you for your resilience, for your strength. You show the best of what Canada's about, and I'm proud, like I said, to be your representative, and it's an honor to be able to fight for you. And with that, folks, thank you for joining me. May God bless you, and I look forward to being able to connect with you again, whatever the medium, but I'm excited for that. So thanks so much, and look forward to connecting again soon. Take care, everybody.